She does hair for a living, my father announced at my brother's rehearsal dinner, lifting his glass like he was giving a toast at a board meeting. One son is a surgeon. The other is marrying a lawyer. He paused, and I watched him find me across the table. And then there's Dani. He laughed. My uncle laughed. 3 of my brother's future in-laws laughed. The way people laugh when they're not sure if something is funny, but they don't want to be the one who isn't smiling. My 9-year-old daughter was sitting right next to me. She had worn her best dress, the navy blue one with the white buttons she'd picked out herself. She tugged on my sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, is doing hair bad?" That was the last dinner I stayed quiet. What I said before the night was over changed things at that table permanently. But before I tell you what happened, you need to understand the 7 years that came before it. Because the man my father was trying so hard to impress that evening, the one at the far end of the table with the silver cufflinks and the careful posture, already knew exactly who I was. My name is Dani Calloway. I'm 32. I'm a single mom, and, for as long as I can remember, my family has introduced me like a footnote. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the beginning of that dinner, but the beginning of why I was still sitting at that table at all. 7 years ago, I was 25 years old, living in a 1-bedroom apartment in Charlotte, with a man who smiled at everyone but me. My ex-husband, if I'm being generous with that title, left on a Sunday morning. Said he needed space to figure things out. Took the car, the savings account, and the good cast-iron skillet. Left me with a lease in both our names, $1,800 on a credit card, and a 2-year-old daughter who kept asking where Daddy went. I didn't have an answer. I didn't have much of anything. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, listened for about 90 seconds, and then said, "Come home. Your father won't love it, but come home." Home was Greensboro, North Carolina. The kind of town where everyone knows your father's name before they know yours. My father had spent 30 years building a reputation in commercial real estate. Committees, golf tournaments, people who called him by his last name as a compliment. My brother was finishing his surgical residency at Duke. My younger brother was engaged to a woman who had passed the bar exam on her first try. And then there was me. Coming home with a toddler, a duffel bag, and a cosmetology license I'd gotten 2 years before anyone thought I was serious about it. My father met me at the door the way he always met difficult news, with a practical face and no hug. "The guest room is ready," he said. "This is temporary, Dani. We're not running a daycare. No welcome, no are you okay. Just terms." I wasn't there a week before it started. A dinner at the house, neighbors over, and my father going around the table introducing everyone like a press release. My brother, the resident physician. My younger brother, the rising attorney adjacent, because he worked in finance, and that sounded better. "And this is Dani," he said, almost as an afterthought. "She does hair." The neighbor nodded politely. My mother passed the breadbasket. I sat there and didn't say a word. It wouldn't be the last time. The thing is, it had never been any different. Growing up, my older brother got the SAT prep courses, the college tours, the parents at every award ceremony. When he got into medical school, my father cried. Actually cried, at the kitchen table, in a way I'd never seen him show emotion about anything. When I told them I wanted to go to cosmetology school, my father set his fork down very slowly and said, "That's not a career, Dani. That's something you do until you figure out what you actually want to do." I was 19. I enrolled anyway, paid for it with money I'd saved from 3 years of waitressing and a small scholarship nobody else had applied for. I graduated at the top of my class. My parents didn't come to the ceremony. My mother sent a card that said she was proud of me. My father called that evening and asked if I'd thought about taking some business classes at the community college. So no. The way he introduced me at that rehearsal dinner wasn't a surprise. It was just the most recent version of a story he'd been telling for years. I spent the first 3 months back in Greensboro, working out of a friend's salon on a booth rental, taking whatever clients I could get, and paying my mother $50 a week toward groceries. My daughter slept in a twin bed in the guest room, with a nightlight shaped like a star that she'd brought from Charlotte. Some mornings I heard her singing to herself in there, and I'd stand outside the door for a minute before I went in, just letting it fill me up before the day could drain me back out. I noticed things working in that salon. Greensboro had money, old money, new money, money that had moved in from Raleigh and Charlotte, looking for more space. These women didn't just want a haircut. They wanted someone who understood their schedule, their texture, their life. They wanted someone who remembered that the last time they were in, they'd just gotten a promotion and their daughter had started kindergarten. They wanted a relationship, not a transaction. I started keeping notes. Not on paper, in my head at first. Then in a notebook I kept in my station drawer. Who preferred which products? Who was coming up on a wedding or a milestone birthday? Who had a scalp condition that needed specific handling and didn't want to have to explain it every single appointment? Within 8 months, I had a 6-week wait list. Within a year, I was turning down clients. My mother mentioned it once at Sunday dinner. "Dani's doing well at the salon," she said, "the way you'd mention the weather." My father nodded and asked my brother about a procedure he'd performed that week. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was building something and the building was what mattered. I believed it about 60% of the time. The change came not with a plan but with a phone call. Her name was Harriet. No, wait. She went by something else. She was my client for 3 years before I realized who she was. A woman in her late 60s, silver hair she wore short and precise, came in every 5 weeks without fail, always tipped 25%. Never once asked me how long I'd been doing this. She just sat down and talked to me like I was a person. One afternoon, she said, "Dani, have you ever thought about your own space?" I had thought about it the way you think about buying a house when you're still paying off your credit card. "Someday," I said. "Someday is a way of saying no without committing to it," she said. She came back the following appointment with a name written on a card. Her nephew, she said. He managed commercial properties across Guilford County and was looking to fill a mixed-use space near downtown. 2 suites. Reasonable terms for the right tenant. I called the number on the card. I drove to see the space on a Tuesday morning before my first client. It smelled like paint and possibility. The light came in from 2 east-facing windows and hit the floors in a way that made everything look intentional. I signed a lease 6 weeks later, named it Lark Studio. It was just me and a sink and a styling chair I'd found secondhand and refinished myself on a weekend while my daughter sat on the floor and handed me sandpaper. The first year was lean. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. There were months where I was doing the math on groceries, the same way I'd done it in Charlotte right after he left. But I kept the wait list, kept the notes, kept showing up. By the second year, I'd hired 2 other stylists on commission. By the third, I had 4 chairs running Tuesday through Saturday, and a standing clientele that included 3 oncology nurses who referred everyone they knew, a local news anchor, and a county judge who had been doing her own hair for 15 years, and finally decided she didn't want to anymore. I didn't tell my family the numbers. I didn't tell them much of anything, honestly. My father had long since filed me under managing okay, nothing to worry about, which in his framework meant he didn't have to think about me. My mother asked occasionally. I gave her general answers. It wasn't dishonesty. It was protection. Mine, not theirs. My daughter was in 3rd grade. She'd started calling the salon her second home, which I only let her do on Saturdays when my last appointment ended at noon, and she could sit in the waiting area reading or drawing while I cleaned up. She had a favorite spot, the chair closest to the window, and she'd established a whole personality there. Client-facing, she called it, because she'd heard me use the phrase once and adopted it immediately. She was funny, she was kind, she was starting to pick up on things I hadn't meant to show her. One evening driving home, she said, "Mommy, why does Grandpa never ask about your work?" I kept my eyes on the road. "Grandpa has a lot on his mind, but you have a lot going on." "I know, baby." She didn't say anything else, neither did I. but I sat with it all the way home and through dinner and after she went to bed. She was 9. She was already noticing the shape of the silence. That same month, something landed in my inbox that changed the math. A new development on the north side of Greensboro, Oakfield Commons, a boutique mixed-use complex with 15 upscale residential units above and 4 commercial suites below. The developer was looking for anchor tenants to fill the ground floor before construction wrapped. The rep's email mentioned high-end wellness, beauty, personal services. The kind of clientele that comes with disposable income and discretion. The contract value for an anchor suite was $400 per square foot. Finished build-out, 5-year lease with 2 options to renew. More than I'd ever signed in my life. I called Harriet that night, told her what I was looking at. "How much of your revenue could you bring with you?" she asked. "All of it," I said. "And then some." That neighborhood puts me closer to half my existing clientele and introduces me to the other half. A pause. "Then, you already know the answer." I submitted my business package the following week. Financials, client roster summary, photographs of the studio, a 2-page letter about what Lark meant to the women who came through the door. I sent it, and then I didn't let myself think about it. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the development group. The representative on the phone had a measured, professional voice. The kind that doesn't give anything away until it gives you everything. He said his name, said he'd reviewed the application, and said, "We'd like to schedule a meeting." His name was Warren Caldwell. He ran Caldwell Property Group, out of a mid-rise office on Elsom Street. I'd driven past the building 100 times without knowing it meant anything to my life. The meeting was a Tuesday at 10. I wore the blazer I'd bought for my cosmetology school graduation and had dry cleaned exactly twice since. I brought a folder with printed financials and a client retention analysis my accountant had helped me put together. Warren shook my hand and looked me in the eye and said, "3 of my colleagues' wives are clients of yours. I've been hearing your name for 2 years." I signed the letter of intent for Oakfield Commons the following Thursday. The same week, my younger brother called to tell me he and his fiancée had set the rehearsal dinner date, 7 weeks out. "Obviously you're invited," he said, with the energy of someone confirming a dentist appointment. "Of course," I said. "It's at the club. Dad's hosting." Of course it was. The dinner was on a Friday evening in April. I wore a dress I'd found at a consignment shop, navy blue, which I thought was a coincidence until my daughter chose the matching navy dress with the white buttons because, she said, "We can twins, Mommy." I didn't tell her that coordination at family dinners had historically not protected either of us. My father was holding court near the bar when we arrived. Greeting guests, shaking hands, performing the version of himself that he saved for occasions where someone might be watching who mattered. I recognized the posture. I'd watched it my whole life. The guest list was 22 people. My brother's fiancée's family, her parents, her aunt and uncle, 2 cousins, family friends, my father's colleagues, and one man I recognized immediately. Warren Caldwell, seated near the end of the long table with his wife, a woman in a green blazer who laughed at something just as I walked in. I stopped moving for exactly half a second. Warren saw me a moment later and nodded, the kind of nod that is doing more work than a nod usually does, acknowledging without announcing, recognizing without explaining. My father had no idea. My father had invited his prospective son-in-law's family friends, without knowing he'd also invited the man who had just signed a 5-year anchor lease with his daughter. I sat down, kept my face still. My daughter found her seat next to mine and immediately started arranging her napkin with a kind of ritual precision that she'd gotten from me. The dinner moved the way these things do. To hosts to the couple, compliments to the venue, the particular social choreography of 2 families who don't know each other yet, trying to figure out where all the edges are. My father stood up halfway through the main course. He tapped his glass. He said what he always says, compliments to his son the surgeon, pride in the match my brother was making. He went around the table in the way I'd grown up, watching him go around tables. Then he found me, And then we have Dani, he smiled. The smile that was half fond and half something else. She does hair for a living. A beat. Keeps her busy. He laughed. A few people laughed, the kind of laugh that fills a room when no one's sure if they're supposed to. My brother's future mother-in-law smiled politely and looked at her plate. Under the table, my daughter's hand found mine. Her fingers were small and cold. I squeezed them once and didn't let go. Then she said it, quietly, but not quietly enough. Mommy. Her voice was careful, serious, the voice she used when she was trying to understand something important. Is doing hair bad? The table went the specific kind of silent that happens when a child says the true thing out loud that all the adults were pretending wasn't there. My future sister-in-law looked at my daughter. My brother looked at his hands. Warren Caldwell set down his fork. My mother recovered first. Sweetheart, Grandpa was just making a little joke. My daughter looked at her grandmother, then at her grandfather, then at me. Nobody laughed though, she said. The table did not recover from that. Not really. I looked at my daughter. This 9-year-old who had watched me sand furniture and answer client calls and balance a schedule and still make it to every school pickup. And I felt something shift. Not break. Not collapse. Shift. The way a key turns in a lock you've been carrying for years without finding the door. I set my napkin on the table. I pushed back my chair. Every head turned. I looked at my daughter first and I spoke to her, but I didn't lower my voice. Doing hair is not bad, I said. Any honest work is good work. You know that. My father started to say something. I didn't let him. But since Dad brought it up, I said, let me tell everyone what I actually do. The room held its breath. I built a business called Lark Studio. I started it with a secondhand chair and a booth rental and a notebook full of client notes. Right now, I employ 6 stylists. I carry 2,200 active clients on my roster. And 3 weeks ago, I signed an anchor lease at Oakfield Commons worth more per year than this dinner cost to host. Nobody moved. My father's expression did the thing I'd only seen it do once before. At my grandfather's funeral, when the eulogist said something he hadn't expected. The color didn't drain, it rearranged. Like someone shuffling furniture in a house that was supposed to stay the same. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. My mother pressed her fingers together on top of the table. And then, from the far end of the room, I heard the deliberate sound of a glass being set down. Warren Caldwell stood up, not dramatically. Just the way a man stands when something needs to be said and sitting down would be wrong. Warren Caldwell, he said, addressing the table. Caldwell Property Group. A pause. Lark Studio is the anchor tenant for my Oakfield Commons development. We signed the letter of intent 3 weeks ago. He looked at my father. I've been trying to figure out all evening why her last name was the same as yours. My father stared at him. Your daughter, Warren said, runs one of the most client-loyal businesses I've vetted in 15 years of commercial leasing. I have 3 partners who asked me specifically to tell her that. He picked up his glass. I wasn't expecting to do that at a rehearsal dinner. He sat back down. The room stayed still for a moment that felt much longer than it was. My brother's fiancé's father cleared his throat. Oakfield Commons, he said. On Wendover? That's the one, Warren said. My firm handles the insurance on that project, the man said. He looked at me. We've been following that development for 2 years. That's a serious anchor commitment. My father sat back down. He hadn't said a word since I stood up. The dinner didn't recover so much as it continued. The way a river keeps moving after something falls in. Conversations resumed. Glasses were refilled. But the shape of the room had changed, and everyone in it knew it. My brother found me by the coat check at the end of the night. He looked like he wanted to say 4 different things and couldn't choose between them. I didn't know, he said finally. I know. You never said. You never asked. He nodded. He was a surgeon and a careful person, and he understood the things that didn't need explaining. I should have, he said. That was enough. For now it was enough. My father didn't say anything to me that evening. He stood near the exit shaking hands as people left, and when I passed with my daughter on my hip, She'd fallen asleep against my shoulder in the last half hour, her breath warm, and even against my neck. He looked at me for a moment, not the look I'd grown up seeing, not the one that filed me away, a different one. I didn't have a name for it. I wasn't sure I needed one yet. I buckled my daughter into the back seat and drove home through streets I'd been driving since I was 17. She woke up briefly when I turned onto our block, lifted her head and said, "Mommy, did you know that man? The one with the cufflinks?" "I did, baby. He was nice," she said and went back to sleep. The fallout was not sudden. It was the particular social physics of a medium-sized southern city where reputation is currency in news, moves through friend groups and committees, and Sunday morning conversations with the precision of a well-aimed stone across still water. By Monday, 3 people had texted my mother asking about the dinner. By Wednesday, the woman who ran my father's golf club's charity committee had called to ask, with a sweetness that was mostly Warnie's, whether everything was all right with the family. My father's world was not large, which meant it was also not private. The Oakfield Commons piece ran in a local business brief 2 weeks later. Not a feature, just a paragraph in the development roundup. Lark Studio as anchor tenant. Quote from Warren about quality of the operators in the project. My name in print, attached to a lease value that was larger than anything my father had ever directly acknowledged about my work. My mother called me after it ran. "I saw the article," she said. Her voice was different, quieter, the way voices get when someone is recalibrating. "I didn't know it was that much, Dani." "I know, Mom." A pause. "I should have asked. I didn't say it was fine, because it wasn't fine and she knew that, and saying otherwise would have been a kindness neither of us needed." "I'm asking now," she said, so I told her, not all of it but the shape of it. The booth rental, the notebook, the secondhand chair, the 6 stylists, the wait list that had never fully cleared in 5 years, the call from Warren, the letter of intent. She was quiet for a long time when I finished. "Your grandfather," she said finally, "used to say that the people who underestimate you are doing you a favor, because they'll never see you coming." I hadn't heard her mention her father in years. He'd died when I was 12. A man I remembered as someone who asked me questions and actually waited for the answers. "I think he was right," I said. My father called 10 days later. It was a Sunday evening. My daughter was in the bath and I was sitting on the porch with a cup of tea that had gone cold. "Dani." His voice was careful. That's the word. Careful in a way it almost never was with me. "Hey, Dad." A pause. "The kind that has weather in it." "That article," he said. "I read it." "Okay, I didn't." He stopped. Started again. "I didn't understand what you'd built." I waited. "I've been thinking about what you said." "At the dinner, which part?" Another pause. "All of it." A breath. "Your daughter." He stopped again. I could hear the grandfather clock in his study, the one that had been there my whole life. "She's perceptive. She gets that from her mother," I said. It came out quieter than I meant it to. He didn't respond right away. When he did, he said, "I know I haven't," and then stopped. And I realized that my father, who had spent 30 years making pronouncements in rooms full of people who deferred to him, did not know how to finish that sentence. Not because he didn't mean to, but because he had never learned how. I didn't finish it for him. "When you're ready to really talk," I said, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, but I'm also not going to sit at another table and let my daughter think she should be embarrassed about what I do." He said, "I understand." Whether he did or didn't, that was his work to do, not mine. The move to Oakfield Commons happened on a Thursday in June. My 6 stylists, the furniture, the product inventory, the framed prints from the old studio walls, all of it loaded into 2 vans and reassembled in a space that had better light, better airflow, and a waiting area with enough seating that no one had to stand. My daughter took a day off school. She was supposed to be home with a sitter, but she called me at 9 in the morning and said, "Mommy, I want to help." So she came. She spent the day carrying things that weren't too heavy and arranging the product shelves according to a system that made sense only to her and turned out to be more logical than the one we'd had before. At the end of the day, She stood in the middle of the floor and turned in a slow circle. The light was coming in from the south-facing windows. The Lark logo was up on the wall. Everything smelled like fresh paint and cedar and the specific products I'd used for 7 years. "Mommy," she said, "it looks like a real place." It was always a real place. She thought about this. "I mean, it looks like somewhere you'd see in a magazine." I laughed, a real one from the chest. She laughed too, and for a minute we were just two people standing in the middle of something we'd built, laughing because there wasn't a better way to respond to it. My brother called to congratulate me the week after the opening. He'd driven past the building, he said. Seen the sign. He asked if he could bring his fiancée in sometime, and I said of course, and meant it without reservation, which was more than I could have said 6 months ago. The thing about family is that it doesn't resolve. It evolves, or it doesn't, and the evolution is never as clean as anyone would like. My father has not apologized. Not in words, not in essay form I would recognize as a formal accounting of what he did and what it cost. But he called again the following month, and the month after that. Short calls, careful ones. He asked about the business. He asked about my daughter. Once, he asked what it was like to run payroll for 6 people, and I told him, and he listened without offering advice for once in his life. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reunion. It was the careful, uncertain beginning of a conversation that should have started 20 years ago and is only starting now, because I stood up at a rehearsal dinner and said, out loud, what had been true in private for years. My daughter started telling people at school what I did. Not with embarrassment, not with the careful shrug her teacher had described to me, but matter-of-factly, the way kids talk about things they're proud of without knowing that's what they're doing. Her teacher stopped me at pickup one afternoon. "She showed me your new location on Google Maps," she said, smiling. "She said you're an anchor." I looked at her. "I'm sorry." "An anchor tenant," the teacher said. She explained the whole thing. "Apparently that means you're what holds the whole building together." I drove home with that, held it in my chest for the whole 20-minute ride. My daughter in the back seat, telling me about her day, her feet not quite reaching the floor. An anchor. She'd taken the word and understood it better than I had. I hadn't thought of it that way, as something that holds, not just something that commits. As something the whole structure depends on. I thought about the booth rental, the notebook, the secondhand chair, the cold cup of tea on the night my father called and didn't know how to finish his sentence. None of that was nothing. Every bit of it was load-bearing. I still have the notebook, by the way. The original one, from the early days at the salon, full of client notes in my own handwriting. Names, preferences, the small things that turned a transaction into a relationship. It's on the shelf in my office at Oakfield Commons, spine out, between 2 reference books I never open anymore. My daughter noticed it the day we moved in. She pulled it out, flipped through a few pages, put it back carefully. "Is this from the beginning?" she asked. "From before the beginning," I said. She looked at it for another moment, then looked at me. "I want to do something like this someday," she said. "Something that starts in a notebook." I turned back to what I was doing, so she wouldn't see my face. Some things don't need a response. You just let them be true, and you remember them later, on a porch, or in a car, or standing in the middle of a space that started as a second-hand chair and a list of names, and you understand that what you built was never just a business. It was the proof that you were always what they couldn't see.